What's going on, everyone? Jim here, RCAD, working on the old, dare I try to pronounce the name, Huina, Huina. I'm sorry if I messed that up. 1550 excavator. Today's project is replacing the motherboard on the excavator itself and the circuit board for the controller. What happened is I installed a set of Huina 1580, 580 gear drive units inside the tracks here, and that overloaded the board and ended up smoking out the power supply going to the motors. So I had to update the board, and I ordered a new board for it, but I'm not too sure if this is going to be able to handle it or not. Here's a look at the circuit board. Mine is completely different on my excavator, and this one is upgraded so it can handle 8.4 volts, so a 2S LiPo. Mine is hardwired in. This one has the plugs on it. It has a separate plug over here, and I'm not too sure exactly what that's for. If anybody knows what that's for, let me know. I might put a voltmeter on it and see if that's just an external power source. Look at our on-off switch right there on the back. So today's project is going to try to wire that baby up in there, as well as replacing the board for our radio as well, our transmitter. This one's going to be a lot easier to replace, just have to solder up two wires on it, positive and negative, and we're all set on that. This is our antenna hanging off the back right here. Getting ready to take it apart. I already rotated the chassis around on the track carriage. That way it's going to give us better access to all the screws on the bottom. We have one screw right up top there, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Remove those screws and we can separate our main upper portion of the chassis or body off of the lower chassis. We have all our screws removed. Just going to pull up a little guardrail there. Take off our battery cover. Now, mine has already been cut out on the inside, so I can just pull this back half off without having to worry about my battery cable getting snagged up on anything. A little side-by-side comparison. There's a peek at our old board up here on the excavator, and our new board. Getting ready to remove the motherboard. It's only held in by 2 Phillips screws, one right over here and one right over here. So we'll get those taken out real quick.
Real quick like here.
Look at the screws for the circuit board. They are slightly smaller than the rest of the screws for the excavator. So I'm going to put those off to the side of my magnetic tray. That way they don't get confused with the rest of them. Both screws removed. Looking on the back of our original motherboard here, they do have all the wires kind of pretty much labeled as to where everything goes here. M1 positive, M1 positive, that's kind of weird. M2 positive, M2 negative, M3 positive and negative, M4 positive and negative, M5, M6. So they do have that all kind of labeled right along there. This one says SP positive and negative, so that's the speaker. Here's your antenna wire. And I have obviously our battery wires coming in. So yeah, if you don't have the instructions, that is a good way to figure out what wire goes to what. And looking at the new board, nothing is labeled as to M1, M2, M3, M4. They do kind of show it on the Chinese instructions. Looking at our Chinese instructions here, some stuff is labeled in English, so it's going to be relatively easy. Well, not so much easy, but you're going to have to go and swap out the wires, wire per wire on your board, and just solder your way down, all the way down the line. Our upper plugs right up here, going from left to right across the top, is our M1 positive and negative, M2 positive and negative, M3 positive and negative, M4, M5, M6, and our LED light right over here on the side. Our 2 small plugs down here on the bottom left corner Far left side is our main battery positive coming in. Next one over is a power going to the speaker. Still no mention of what this empty socket is right there. I'm assuming that's probably for lights or maybe for one of the attachments on the end of the bucket, possibly. I don't know. I'm not too sure. This is my only excavator that I have, a little 1550, so not familiar with the other ones. And then looking up here on our transmitter instructions, everything is kind of labeled here as well. So M3 is our bucket curl in and out. M4 is our secondary boom in and out. M2 is our right track forward and reverse. M1 is our left track forward and reverse. M6 is to articulate to the right. M6 over here, two M6s. So we got right and left articulation on M6. M5 is our main boom up and down. Our antenna wire, I believe that's the program button right there, so it'll go through its little pre-programmed set deal. And yeah, so there we go. We got a basic layout as to what is what and what is what on the board. Going back to our main motherboard, the original motherboard, everything is labeled on here. Once again, M1 through M6. So I'm basically just going to put my new circuit board up here next to it and start soldering one wire at a time. So I'll cut one wire off, solder it on to the new connection, go to the next one, so on and so forth, all the way down the line, one wire at a time. That way there is no confusion as to what is what. And we'll see how everything turns out there once we get finished. Alright, so we have all our new wire extensions soldered into place on the excavator. I removed all the plugs right off of the circuit board. That way there's no chance of shocking the board while doing this process. Once again, I just start with M1 positive and then M1 negative and then M2 positive and M2 negative and so on and so forth all the way down the line, soldering them up one at a time and removing them from the old motherboard one at a time. As far as the speaker is concerned, the new motherboard came with a new speaker, so no worries about resoldering this. Just a matter of removing the two Phillips screws and pulling the speaker out of there and plugging the new one in. A new motherboard also came with a new LED light, the marker light, so no worries about that as well. No soldering to be done with that. So we're all done with the old motherboard for the most part. Next thing to do is actually install our board back up onto the excavator here and then pull apart our transmitter and swap out the board on this. Putting our board back in place again here using our two micro Phillips screws to reattach this. Leaving that one somewhat loose, that first one, until I get the second one in place. Just make sure that nothing's walking around anywhere. No need to go crazy on tightening these down. It's not going anywhere. So we'll snug it down just a little bit, and we're all set with that one. Moving our LED light out of the way, getting our speaker into position down over here. Get this reinstalled. I do have an abundance of wire here, so just kind of trying to find a spot where I can run these wires where they're not going to be getting stressed or bent in the wrong direction. Kind of pointing the wires up towards the cab there a little bit. No need to go crazy on tightening down these screws. Once again, that speaker's not going anywhere. So, mental note, our antenna is on the other side now. It used to be on this side over here, and now we're on that side. This board, once again, seems to be somewhat upside down compared to the original. I'm going to try to bring these wires around somewhere where they're not going to get crushed by anything in particular. Sorry if you can't see what I'm doing here. You get the idea, we don't want to crush any wires. Get everything routed in a copacetic fashion here. Now it's just a matter of figuring out where all our stuff goes here. Get everything all hooked back up again. Starting off with the motors, our drive units, that's M1 and M2. So we're going to get those in place first, and then move on to the rest of them. Move our little LED light back out of the way here so we're not tripping on that. Alright, so there is our motors installed. Next set of wires to be plugged in is the main boom, and that is M3 and M4. Grab M3 and M4 here, and I'm trying to twist these wires around once again so they're going to be laying in here nicely without tweaking a bunch of stuff out of whack. Lastly is our rotation right here, turntable motor. So M5 and M6 last to be connected. Once again, a matter of straightening out wires and making sure nothing's getting tangled or jammed up on anything. But tougher getting this one in place. At least on camera anyways. Last thing that we need to do under here, before we button everything up and make sure that everything is going in the right direction so we don't have to come back in and resolder wires, is hook up our LED bulb. Not a big fan of this LED bulb, everyone. This is a blue and red flasher, police car tradition, I guess. Does not belong on an excavator. For an excavator, you'd want an amber light generally. I don't know why the manufacturer doesn't include an amber light on here versus the red and blue flasher. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take an orange neon Sharpie and I'm going to color this bulb orange. It might not look right. I'm not too sure how it's going to look when it starts flashing. You might see some blue in there. You might see some red in there. You're definitely going to see some orange in there. There is the Sharpie right there. Orange neon Sharpie. They work really good for turning clear bulbs into amber bulbs. And we're going to try to turn that into an amber bulb. Normal location for this bulb is right up here in the dashboard. Right in front of our track control levers is right where that bulb sits. New location is up in the roof of the cab. So I have a hole drilled up there in the roof of the cab and run the bulb right up through the bottom and hot glue it into place, run the wires right on down the inside. And it might possibly look sort of official. I doubt it, but alright, continuing along here. Looking at the light on top of the cab, but we have our blue and red flasher painted amber with that orange neon Sharpie once again, and then hot glued up into the roof of the cab. May not look right. We'll find out how it's going to look. It might look a little cheesy. I'm not too sure. And just to cheapen things up a little bit more, I used a black Sharpie to color the wires and the hot glue black on the inside of the cab there, just to blend the wires in and the hot glue in the ceiling of the cab. I ran the wires down the far right side of the cab because we have this opening right back here and allows the wires to stick back out. I have the original bulb glued back up inside the cockpit, also painted amber with the orange neon Sharpie. I came in here with a little micro torch, one of these little guys, and just heated up the plastic very slightly right here just so I could bend the handles back a little bit closer to the driver since we had the cockpit out of the vehicle. Getting our driver put in place. Fits in nice and neat. Nothing's chafing back here, no wires are getting jammed up or anything. Nice perfect fit. Locking our cab back into position with our front and lower tabs there. Make sure our wires are pulled up out of the way, and that is home. Alright, so taking our light wire, running it back around and plugging it in over yonder here. Right back over here. So that is all keyed up and ready to go. A whole bunch of wires in here at this point in time. Taking a look at our battery cable here. Going to a T-style connector, which is what I have on my batteries for the most part. Spared no expense on the length. I could have shortened it up a little bit. We'll just bury all this stuff in here. More weight. Some copper weight added to it this time, I suppose. So we're not going to slap the chassis back on this just yet. We're going to wait until we make sure that our circuit board works with our transmitter. We want to make sure everything's jiving. We want to make sure everything's going in the right direction before we put the rest of the excavator back together. Alright, working on the radio transmitter. First thing to do is remove the batteries from it. Usually there's a little Phillips screw here to remove, and I've taken that out a long time ago. Not the proper way to remove batteries. And the next thing to do is to remove this little collar right here on the front. That is going to hold your whole radio together, your transmitter right there. Peel that little guy off of there. Otherwise, you're going to have a lot of trouble trying to take this thing apart. Now it's just a matter of removing all the screws on the back half. We've got 1 here, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. 7 screws to remove. You want to take this apart carefully. I recommend that you hold this together the entire time while you're doing this. Okay, now our buttons are all starting to fall off here. So it's kind of taking all these buttons off of here. These are held in with screws. We'll go ahead and remove these 2 little joysticks. We'll set them off to the side. And we have 4 more screws to remove to get the board off. 1, 2, 3, and 4. After we make sure to get the rest of our buttons cleaned up here. And exposing our positive and negative battery wires there. Looking at our new board, they give us a little bit of room on these wires, but really not all that much to speak of. So I'm going to cut these somewhat short on here, closer to the board. I'm not going to ruin them. I'm not going to cut them short enough that I can't resolder them, but I'm going to cut them a little bit short on here, just to leave a little bit extra wire on here to solder onto. Yeah, so I'm trying to find a little happy medium here for cutting these wires. This is a pair of Duratrax body scissors. Thin wires, it cuts through them pretty easy. So there's a look at our old board. Antenna. Look at our new board. Pretty much identical. On the back, though, they do look pretty darn close on the back. On the front, only difference is our new board has this little capacitor or transistor up there, and the old one does not. Now, I could solder these wires directly onto our posts down here. Only problem with that is I'm using a butane-powered soldering iron, and I'm afraid that I might melt these sockets and loosen those up a little bit. So that's another reason I want to just direct connect our wires 1-to-1 and use some shrink wrap to seal them up. So what I'm going to do right now, these have already been pre-tipped with solder. I'm going to come in here and just trim off that little bit of wire. That way I can strip some casing off of here a little bit easier without actually tearing the wire. Just cutting that little tip off the end of it. Using a small pair of wire strippers here. Put a little twist on our wires. So our board is all wired up here, essentially. Matter of reattaching everything. Alright, so we've got all those installed. Now is the time to get our buttons back in place. I'm going to start with our two side joysticks here. These actually get screwed on first, so you can attach these with one of the original controller screws here. Alright, so we have both our joysticks put in place. Getting ready to move on to the rest of the nonsense here. Our other little rocker buttons here, these are going to have to go into this part of the controller right here. So putting our rockers in here. Getting these set in place. Just like so. Making sure that we line up our pinholes, our little rocker points. Put our other group of switches back in here. I'm going to take our little bumpers off and put those in right up here. Now we're going to have to, this is going to be tough to do. We're going to have to kind of lean this forward to keep these bumpers in place. Sort of like this. Keep a steady little lean on it to keep them in place so they're not falling out like that. Because we're going to have to flip this controller upside down and set this back on top of it. Or else we'll never get all this stuff back together. A little bit of a balancing act going on here with this guy. Get the rest of our transmitter around and try to slip this in here nice and easy. Alright, we got her back together. It's a matter of attaching our screws and getting this thing all held back down. Matter of installing our little cappy-doo back up on the end here. Just like so. Alright, we're all working. Now I haven't put our soldering iron away just yet. I left that out just in case I need to come in here and change some stuff around. Oh, we're good to go. Make sure all our controls are working okay. Oh, up and down is reversed. I need to flip that around. Moving in, out, moving our second. Moving our secondary arm in and out is working okay. Bucket is reversed. So I need to change the bucket out. And I need to change our main up and down out. See if our track units work, which is kind of what the whole process was all about to begin with, was the track motors. Making sure that they work. And I think they are backwards. I have to hold them in opposite directions. So I need to come back in here and do a little bit of rewiring on all this stuff and make sure that we get everything going back in the right direction. We're going to have to come in here and start figuring out what goes to what and start swapping some wires around. As well as the track units. I'm thinking about reversing my track units and leaving my track motors at the front versus at the back of the excavator, just because of the way everything rotates. You have more power now with these bigger motors. I noticed before my circuit board blew out on me, I noticed that the tracks were binding up a little bit when I had the drive units on the other end. So I might rotate it around so my drive units are at the front. So since I'm rewiring this anyways, I'm just going to flip those around a little bit and get them so they're both going in the right direction, and have our track motors on the front of the excavator versus on the back. And this is why it pays to write everything down. When I did my main excavator project, I wrote down what the passenger side track, red wire being positive, black wire, driver's side, blah, 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 and all the cylinders along the way. So I have all my wiring right here, knowing what color is what for what thing. Just a matter of searching out our wires in here and flip-flopping them around. Looking at our mess here, I had to switch a couple things around. M5, which is our main boom up and down, that needed to be flipped around. So I basically found out where those wires were coming from, which are these guys right here. They were red to red and black to black, so I just cut the wires, flipped them around, and that took care of that little issue. Our next one is our bucket curl in and out, and that is M3. So I went in here and found M3, which is this guy right here. Same thing. I come in and switch around, cut the wires, and go red to black and black to red. So that is taken care of for our main bucket. For our track drive units, I did rotate the chassis around and flip-flop those. So that's M1 and M2, and I flipped those around, which are these guys over here, as well as figured out what direction they needed to go in. So forward was forward and reverse was reverse, and have those all resoldered back up again. So M1 and M2 have been flip-flopped around and resoldered together. M5 has been fixed and M3 has been fixed. So let's get this baby back together and see if everything works. Alright, we got everything all plugged back in again. Everything's jiving in that direction. Secondary boom, we didn't have a problem with that, but that is still working good, so no problem with that. Main boom up and down. Yep. Bucket. Check. The extra curl bucket that we got going on there. Checking our tracks here. So forward, reverse, we are all working good there. Right and left swivel are working good. I think we're all set. Everything's wired up on the excavator. It's all good to go. Before I put it back together, I busted out the hot glue gun. A bunch of bolts here, a whole bucket of bolts. And some nuts over there. And then just went a little crazy with the hot glue gun trying to weigh down this excavator, add some weight to the main chassis. That way we can counter-react all the weight that's on the boom there. So, unfortunately, the way the chassis is laid out, they let you can get more weight on the passenger side of the chassis over here on the right side than you can on the left side. A little bit of a bummer there. But the more weight the merrier ultimately. We need some weight on this thing so we can get some good buckets of material. Definitely won't have a problem moving that weight around with those big 580 motors that are in here. So we should be alright as far as that is concerned. Only real problem is going to be our left to right pivot. I'm probably going to be feeling some weight there, but if we get it properly balanced on our chassis plate here, we shouldn't have that much of a problem. Right now it's still leaning to the front. So still need to get some more weight on the back of this thing. So once again, came in here, glued in a bunch of bolts through all the little empty spots back here. Try not to go too far above some of our little locator points here. Try not to block off any of our mounts right there as well. You can definitely get more weight on the passenger side over here on the right side than you can on the left side of the cab. That is for sure. Just not as much room to work with here. You've got all this stuff sitting here. Yeah, you can remove your speaker, get rid of that, and then load this area up with some weight, I'm sure, if you want to get rid of your speaker. I didn't necessarily want to do that. On the underside of the driver, I came in and glued a bunch of bolts in here. Wedged a couple of nuts up into the seat because this is kind of hollow in here. So I wedged a bunch of nuts up into there and hot glued those in place. Capped them off with a couple of bolts. Wedged a couple of nuts down here on the side. Hot glued them in. Wedged a bunch down into here. Some big fat nuts in there. That's what she said. And hot glued those into place, leaving us enough room for clearance in the spots that we need clearance. Right around all this nonsense right here. So this should sit just like this. It still does, so we're all good there. Everything still fits in here alright. It's gained quite a bit of weight since doing all that nonsense to it. So I also came in here with a hot glue gun in efforts of adding more support to our plastic chassis pan here. So leaving enough room that we can get our cab put in place still. Be able to slip our cab in place here. I kind of ran that hot glue gun around all the gussets here on the inside of the chassis and filled a lot of these gussets completely up, all these gaps in between here. Kind of filled those right up to the top, making sure to leave enough room once again that we can get our stuff bolted back on. And this is just all in efforts of trying to stiffen up this chassis plate here and give us a little bit more strength there. Once again, with all our new screw servos on here, really putting a lot of flex on this chassis, so I want to stiffen this up a little bit, and I figured adding some hot glue in here would be a good method of doing that, just for a quick fix. And all along the back as well, right in between all these frame gussets, just a bead of glue all back and through here, right up around the edge of these gussets here. Not too far back in by the circuit board, just mainly right around the edges of all these mounts. Just trying to add some more support on all this stuff, some more strength back here, because once again I'm going to probably be adding some more weight to the back of this. Looking at our upper rear portion of our chassis right here, our battery cover and all that other good nonsense, this baby has gained some weight as well. I came in here and glued a bunch of bolts in here, making sure not to go up past our mounts right there, staying below that point across the inside. Same along here, staying below our mounting points, so we're not going to interfere with anything. Glue bolts in all along on this side. Now this is the passenger side over here, so I had to measure once, cut twice, all that good nonsense, and keep sizing this up after gluing things in here to make sure that everything was going to clear. So we still have good clearance there. I actually had too many in here at one point in time. I had to pull a couple of them out to make sure that I could get our chassis or our body butt back in place. So a maximum amount of weight added over here on the passenger side. Really bulked it up over here on the driver's side, just because we have more weight on the passenger side of the vehicle over here on the excavator. So I really threw some stuff in over here on the driver's side just because we don't have that much room to work with in here. So I figured I'd bulk it up on the inside as best I can. Same back here behind our factory steel weights that are in here. I put a bunch of nuts in behind all that nonsense and then hot glued all that stuff together. So this is like one solid piece back here. That way later on when I come in with some lead tape weights, I can load up the whole back of this thing with tape weights like a real excavator. And hopefully that'll counter-react our main boom a little bit better. And I also came in with that hot glue gun and ran beads of glue up all the gussets here for our plastic supports. Up and around all that nonsense. Just trying to add some more stability to those as well. So we're going to get this baby button back up and then we'll throw it on a scale and see how much she weighs. Alright, slapping this baby back together here. It's like a spider web, you know, you just kind of feel it there. Make sure our wires are up and out of the way. And the cockpit is sitting down there. Alright, so our cab is good. We can bolt that back down. Don't need to go crazy with this stuff. These bolts, screws aren't really going anywhere. Not moving parts. Just holding the cab in place. I suppose it is helping to stiffen up the chassis a little bit with total support across the board. Make sure all our wires are not going to get hit on anything here. All the bolts sticking up through my battery tray there. No immediate danger. This is the tricky part right here. Trying to get this wire in place. Alright, let's see if we can get this baby closed back up here. Easier said than done. back down. Just need to screw everything back together. So my next thing that I need to do is peel off the tracks, take off the cover, unscrew our 3 screws, put a 180 on our track carriage, and bolt it back up. Gently remove our tracks here. This thing is gaining some weight here as well. Alright, so our track units are removed. Now all we need to do is just remove our screws for the underside of the carriage and flip our carriage around. Couldn't get a full 180 on our track just because of the way the 3 screw holes are set up on the inside. It's meant to go one way and not really meant to go the other way, so can't get a full 180 on that track unit back there. We did get it partially around though, so that'll help out big time. Alright, well, now that we got our new board in there, we can switch over to a LiPo. I'm using a legendary Buckster 2000 milliamp 2S3C battery. This is 3C lithium ion. So not very much output there on 3C. But we're going to a 2S LiPo, so that's a huge jump up from our 400 milliamp NiCad battery that we had in here. Alright, we're good there. Radio on, excavator on. We'll shut our noise off. Looking at our flashing light there on the roof, you can see that it still has some red in it and some blue in it. But we definitely have some orange in there as well. It doesn't look terrible, but it could be better. Alright, let's give the excavator a run here. It seems like it's pivoting better left to right. It seems like it's more balanced now, front to rear, after adding the rest of that weight in there. Motors are having no problem powering the excavator and moving it around. The Huina 1580 motors. Not too bad, really. She gets along pretty good with all that weight on there, that is for darn sure. Let's go ahead here, throw this thing on a scale, and see what she's weighing in at. Better close my door for that nonsense. This is a fishing scale made by Zebco. Right now we are at right around 8 pounds. 8 pounds is what we're looking at right now, which is about 3.5 kilograms, about 3.5 kilos. 8 pounds is what we're tacking in at. That's not bad, really. 8 pounds out of this little girl. She's getting pretty heavy. I think that actually weighs more than a Huina 1593. I think that only weighs in at about 6 pounds. And right now, we're hitting 8 pounds on the scale. Right down there is where we're sitting at with this thing. Right there. So, hard to pull on it with that little teeny mini hook that was digging in my hand. So yeah, 8 pounds on that thing. That's something, really, for that little machine. So that's going to do it, everyone. Very much appreciated for y'all sticking around and watching the video. As always, questions and comments are always welcome. And we will see you all on the next one. Thanks again.